So this review of Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door is truly the first straight review that I've ever written for the channel. Oh sure, I've analyzed and passed judgment on lots of games. Okay, maybe not lots, but at least a handful. But they've all either been hyper-specific pieces like Cracking Celeste, or comparison pieces like my Tears of the Kingdom series or my first Paper Mario video. I've never taken a game and looked at it on its own before. Now, Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door is a heck of a place to start this. I mean, most of the dialogue surrounding this game has been from fans using it as the metric against which future games in the series were measured. Since its release in 2004, this game has always been rated and compared against its predecessors, contemporaries, and successors alike in ways that most other games couldn't take. So reviewing the remake of this game after 20 years of the original being framed in this way is a tall order, but I'm up to the task. This game deserves the chance to be seen on its own. I'm forgetting everything I learned in training, putting all of my Paper Mario and Bug Fables and RPG experience away, and looking at this game for what it is alone. I never played the original, so this is a brand new experience for me. Does this game stand up to the test of time? Let's find out. I'm Volcaronite, and here's my review of Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. Before we get started, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to get notified when I release videos. I've got several more reviews in the works. Get subscribed so you don't miss them. Alright, let's tackle the actual mechanics and story of the game first, before getting into the details of my favorite and least favorite parts. The Thousand-Year Door is what I might call a light JRPG style game. It's got an overworld crawling with enemies that you encounter in turn-based combat, gaining experience points and leveling up to become more powerful. You build up a party of heroes and get into battles with them, using your lead character and one other ally to take on foes. You progress linearly through a world, fighting bosses and gaining new moves and attacks on your way to the end of the game. And it was made by a Japanese company in the style of other Japanese RPG games. It's light simply due to the complexity of these features, or rather the lack thereof. Numbers for stats, damage, and health are kept low. Most attacks deal damage in the single digits, your stats are almost always below 40, the hardiest enemy in the game has 200 health. These manageable numbers help with the game's accessibility and mastery. Okay, boring genre talk over. This is a very typical base for lots of games to build on, and the Thousand-Year Door has a number of interesting features built atop it to make it into a genuinely unique experience. We'll start with combat, which is one of the two pillars of the game. The most obvious unique feature is probably the action command system. It's pretty simple, but allows a little bit of interactivity and skill to go into the typical turn-based combat. Every attack has an associated action prompt, which is just a series of button or directional inputs that you do in time with the attacks to increase your damage. You hit A as you jump on enemies, hold the joystick back and let it fly forward in time with a hammer strike. This is a pretty novel way of giving attacks different power and adding a little bit of variety to the game without randomness, which I regard as a fantastic thing. If you hit with extra damage on an attack, it feels great. If you miss, it wasn't a low roll or a random chance, it was on you. It's not the hardest system in the world or anything, but it definitely develops into some tricky sequences. As you get more powerful attacks, the action commands become more complex. For example, several attacks can hit multiple enemies at once. Mario's requires you to time the action commands and hit enemies until you miss one. Fairly easy to pull off, but not too punishing if you miss. Then, you get a timing-based attack that's a little more all or nothing. Eventually, you get one that requires you to quickly press 5 buttons, but they're revealed in sequence. And finally, your most powerful attack is a button-mashing affair that increases in power the more you press. These action commands get progressively harder with progressively stronger attacks, but they don't punish failure with no attack, just weaker ones. If you're not great at them, then clever positioning and strategies can always get around them. They're not required, but with practice, you're rewarded with quicker battles in which you take less damage. This is one of the defining features of Paper Mario combat, and it's well considered and a lot of fun. The other defining feature is the badge system, and it's equally well considered. As you level up in the game, you don't increase stats like attack and defense. Instead, you get a choice of 3 unique stats. Health, your normal HP, typical to any RPG, but also flower points, called FP, and badge points. Those other two systems combine to turn regular stat increases into a fascinatingly intricate system that's always player-led and fun. We'll start with the badge points. Throughout the game, you'll find a lot of collectibles called badges that you can equip. Each of these has an effect. Some give simple stat buffs, others have special moves or unique world effects, and each of these has a cost. That cost is in badge points, meaning you need to have enough badge points spare to equip a certain badge. Simple enough, right? With this system, you could choose to simply equip stat buffs. There's several badges that increase Mario's attack power, defense, and health. Aside from health, badges are the only way to change Mario's base stats, so these are incredibly useful. But there's also a lot of special move badges that interact with your flower points. Your flower points, FP, might be called mana in a lot of other games. It's your supply of powerful special moves that you can execute. You always have a suite of basic attacks that have no cost, but special badge moves can have more damage, special effects, or hit unique enemies in ways that normal attacks might not be able to. For example, you learn through the beginning of the game that Mario's two primary attacks, jumping and hammering, can be used to hit different enemies with different defenses. If an enemy has a spike on top of them, then you probably don't want to jump on them, so you hit it with a hammer. If an enemy is flying, then the hammer can't reach, so you have to use Mario's famous jump to hit them. But what happens if a flying enemy has a spike on it? You can't use either, right? Well, if you have the hammer throw badge equipped, you can use some FP to throw your hammer at the enemy, allowing you to damage it in a way that you otherwise couldn't. But of course, that hammer throw badge comes at a cost. If you have it equipped, maybe you can't have an attack boost badge on. So maybe you want to risk getting rid of it so that you can beat all other enemies faster, and use disposable items on those unique enemies that you couldn't hit otherwise. It's all a balancing act, and working through it to get a build that you want to use is incredibly engaging. I experimented with all sorts of badges. I had one that made Mario permanently electric, meaning that anything that touched him directly got zapped and took a little extra damage. This was at the expense of an attack boost, since I hoped that the damage would balance itself out. Instead of using an ice attack badge, I used a badge that meant that Mario wouldn't get burned, so I could use a regular jump attack on fiery enemies. It goes deeper, gets more complex, and is overall a joy to use. There's lots more to the combat system, from the audience, a charming but fun way to incorporate some really powerful attacks, to the intricacies of partners, which we'll talk about later. But I want to get to the other pillar of this game, which is the game's main story. It's one of the most detailed and nuanced stories in Nintendo's catalog, not that high a bar, but still, and is most of what you're doing when you're not fighting. Here's the elevator pitch. You, as Mario, get a letter from Princess Peach saying that she's found a map to a super ultra turbo treasure beneath a city called Rogueport. She sends you a map to the treasure and beckons you come help her search. When you get there, Peach is gone, kidnapped by a group of baddies called X-Nauts that are also looking for the treasure. So, you're sent through the world to collect 7 crystal stars, which act as keys to the 1,000-year door that guards the treasure. From a high level, this isn't much different to any Mario plot, just with different names for the tropes this time. But as you play, you start to get rumblings of something darker. These crystal stars are possessed by some of the game's big baddies, and they're being used to power some capital E evil stuff. People are going missing, being eaten, turned into pigs. The treasure they guard is actually an apocalyptic demon that's already destroyed the city once. The X-Nauts are trying to free the demon, eventually learning that instead of trying to beat Mario, they should just let him do his thing and open the 1,000-year door for them. Throughout all of this, there's tons of side stories that add life and flavor to this world. There's a short segment in every chapter where you play as the captive Peach, who's being held by a computer that has fallen in love with her. The computer betrays its principals and creators by supporting Peach throughout the journey. You also play as Bowser, who's just fantastically incompetent and several steps behind both Mario and the X-Nauts at all times. Bowser is usually the final boss of these games, so when you see how lost and confused he is, it makes the real enemies feel all the more threatening. And all of that is not even to mention the side stories of some of the non-playable characters in the game. We'll get to some of my favorites in a bit, but let me just say that these add so much charm and variety to the world. They're all woven into the game's main plot fairly well, and many lead to some genuinely moving or epic experiences that are usually completely absent from Mario games. These stories are also supported by the world design, which is pretty remarkable. Each of the crystal stars is in its own region, being held by some malevolent force that is tormenting the residents. The regions vary a lot, but usually have some overworld, a settlement with at least one unique race of people, and a sort of dungeon where the boss lives. Your first path leads you through this exactly. You venture through a meadow to Petalburg, which is being tormented by a hideous dragon living in a nearby castle. You make your way to the castle, solving some overworld navigational puzzles and fighting enemies, before you arrive at the final boss. Defeating the dragon brings peace to the town and saves those that the dragon has eaten. But this structure would be tiresome if it were repeated 7 times. Fortunately, there's tons of variety in this. The 3rd region has you enter into a fighting pit, aiming to become the world champion wrestler. The boss of the pit likes the cut of your jib and even supports you, until he starts to become threatened. So he reveals that he's been hiding a star and kidnapping those fighters that were too big a risk. You have to beat him down to save those fighters and get the star. Or the 6th star that takes you on a mysterious train ride where you have to solve a handful of mysteries with the help of the clueless detective Pennington. You solve a case of missing soup, appease a ghost that's accidentally stolen a blanket, and eventually quell a beast that's taken the entire train hostage on your way to the Crystal Star. See, the sheer visual and mechanical variety of these locales, combined with the exploration abilities that you get throughout the game, lead to an experience that's almost never boring. The abilities aren't even that interesting on their own. You can jump higher, hit stuff from far away, or blow certain obstacles off, but they become a part of exploring these unique regions and add to the joy of the game. And that's the bulk of this game taken care of. It's one of the most unique JRPGs you'll ever play. It looks and sounds amazing, the papery art style is a lot of fun, and makes even simple stuff delightful, and I definitely recommend it. But this video isn't over yet, because this game has something that is typically absent from Mario games that makes it not just unique, but almost unparalleled. I don't know if there's a good way to tackle reviewing The Thousand Year Door without talking about the main highlight of the game, its limitless creativity. I've played a Super Mario game or two in my day, and I've seen all the types of places that Mario tends to visit. Grasslands of all kinds, mountains, beaches, poisonous swamps, deserts and lakes, lava-moated castles, wintry blizzard lands, the works. But I'd never visited a seedy city with dueling mob gangs, featuring a literal gallows at its center, or a mechanical floating island on a city obsessed with wrestling, accessible by blimp and filled with roaring fans. Or a town perpetually washed in the dim red twilight, its unique species cursed to turn into pigs whenever the haunted cathedral in the woods rings its bell. This game is positively bursting with creative potential that it regularly explores. I think that the creative nexus around which this entire game orbits is, fittingly, the game's hub. When you think of a hub world or a home base in a Mario game, what do you think of? In the 3D platformers, places like Delfino Plaza or the Common Observatory come to mind. Idyllic habitats for the main race of creatures to live and work in. The Origami King features Toad Town, the castle town around the palace. White brick roads, beautiful structures, calm, pretty, fancy places. But look at Rogueport. This port town is a grim, grisly place. People who live there constantly talk about the sorry state of the city. You don't really want to be there yourself. The captain of the boat that brings you there in the very beginning of the game is shocked that you really want to get off here, and the residents of the city, that is, those that don't try to rob you, swindle you, or beat you up, echo this sentiment. Most of the town is split in two, with each half run by a gang. The Robo gang controls the east of the city, and they're a sorry bunch. Tattered clothes, filthy homes, these guys love to fight. You visit their side either by paying off a guard or beating him up, and he'll remember what you do. Muddy footprints dot the streets, storage crates are piled in every alley. To the west is the nicer part of the city, though even that is relative. The Pianta Syndicate, a Godfather-inspired group of conmen and thugs, make their home here. They run a casino that brings in most of their money, and they're well off enough to at least keep their half of the city clean. But the group is vicious. At the very beginning of the game, you'll be watching your first partner, Goombella, introduce herself and give you your first exposition of the game, while a couple of Pianta thugs beat up some of the Robo gang behind you. And all of that is just in the background. You do work with these gangs to advance your own goals. Mario and his team take a neutral stance in the turf war, but you don't really solve their conflicts or help them make up. The gangs in the city aren't any better off at the end than they were at the beginning. It's this backdrop upon which most of the game plays, because Rogueport is the dead center of the game. That's true of the world, as most of it branches off from Rogueport, but also in status. Rogueport is the seediest of the game's locations, but it's far from the worst to live in. I mentioned Twilight Town, but I want to bring it up again because it's just so unique. This town, populated by these humanoid Twilighter creatures, sits on the very edge of a haunted forest growing around a cathedral. That cathedral is host to hundreds of malevolent ghosts and spirits. Side note, this game might have the creepiest boo design of any Mario game that serve to keep the dour residents of Twilight Town on edge. The dim light of the setting sun is always in the sky, day and night, and the cheeky Dupless has played a prank on the town, slowly turning the residents into pigs. This prank is demonstrated to you when you walk in on a family of 5. Well, now 4, since the breadwinner and father of the family has been turned into a pig. The mother and her 3 children are starving, so she begs you for food. As you hand it to her, the bell rings out, and she gets turned into a pig. Her 3 children are left, starving and terrified, as the pig that was once their mother gobbles down the first food they've seen in days. That's a real thing that actually happens in a Mario game. Nintendo is typically seen as a family-friendly company, making games that are lighthearted and fun. They do occasionally toy with darker themes, and they do own more mature properties, but this story is downright dark. It's sort of terrifying. And that's not something that you expect from a Mario game. In fact, it might be the lighthearted nature of most Mario games that made me more vulnerable to these darker moments, and I regard that as an amazing thing. The creativity of the various regions and peoples in the game allows the Thousand Year Door to create an atmosphere that is totally unique. It is the atmosphere of the game that is its biggest strength. Let's talk through another one of these moments. You're eventually sent to a deserted island called Keelhull Key, rumored to have an enormous treasure, through the main story, but you don't have a way to get there. In the pub below the inn at Rogueport sits a rich captain, flamboyantly singing and telling totally credible stories of his maritime marvels. This is Flavio. He's a cartoonish pirate captain, claiming to be wealthy and hardy, but he's too nervous to sail to Keelhull even after he agrees to lend you his ship and crew. So, he sends you to find the one sailor in the city that can manage the trip, Admiral Bobbery. There's a door on the Robo Gang side of the city that has been present but locked since the very beginning of the game. I had forgotten about it myself as it faded into the background after countless trips by it, but there was someone inside the whole time. Bobbery, a Bob-omb that has been in mourning since before the beginning of the game, lives there. He was an accomplished seafarer, but his beloved wife caught some illness and died while he was away. He blamed himself for not being there and swore off the sea, losing both of his loves in one fell swoop, choosing to while away his days in depressing isolation. You bring him a letter written by his late wife, Scarlett, which had been held by his friend at the pub, too embarrassed and depressed to share it with him. Scarlett had written that her death wasn't anyone's fault and not to blame himself. Invigorated by the words of his wife, Bobbery is convinced to return to the sea, looking to bring his own spirit back to life. But when his first voyage goes wrong and you crash into the island, you find Bobbery dying beneath a tree. He asks you to grant him one final wish, to get him a bottle of his favorite drink that he brought with him. So you get it from Flavio, who'd recovered it from the wreckage, and bring it to him. He drinks it, closes his eyes, and dies. Now, he's not actually dead, he's sleeping, but this just plays into the atmosphere of the game. It's not afraid to throw gut punches at the player, and it's all driven by the game's writing and characters. We're not talking about award-winning depth and complexity here, but there's several characters throughout the game that have their own real motivations and stories. I think your partners are the most emblematic of these stories. There's plenty of other interesting plot lines, like the love story between the daughter and the right-hand man of Don Pianta, but the most compelling among them are usually reserved for partners. Koops, the Koopa that has been frightened for years by the disappearance of his father at the dragon's castle, finally finds the metal to seek revenge and slay the dragon. Vivian, who originally appears as an enemy with her sisters, is bullied by them incessantly until she eventually switches sides and joins Mario. Like I said, these aren't groundbreaking, but they're pretty awesome side plots in this story. In fact, I think your partners are part of the uniquely creative atmosphere of the game. You're journeying through these places, but so are they. Some of them come from these places, but the rest are looking in from an outside perspective. They always have something to add. And while they're so great for the general atmosphere of the game, they aren't perfect. In fact, talking about the partners leads us to the single biggest flaw in the Thousand Year Door. The single biggest threat to the Thousand Year Door, the one thing that threatens to tear the entire game open, isn't any of the bosses. It's not Grotus or the Shadow Queen. It certainly isn't Bowser. It's not any of the shadowy locales or the apocalyptic cataclysm that looms over the entire world. No, the single darkest piece of the game is right here. Yep, this spunky, upbeat college student, Goombella, is the worst part of the Thousand Year Door. Goombella is a valuable ally for Mario throughout the game. Saving her from the X-Nauts and Lord Crumb is the very first thing that you do. She thanks Mario with a smooch. This is a surprisingly frequent through line. Just about every female character in the game intimates that they'd like to climb into Mario's pipe, and becomes Mario's first partner. With her tattle ability and eventually her rally wing, she becomes invaluable in battle and out. That fact, though, leads us to the problem with Goombella, because she is representative of the problem with partners as a whole. Like I said, the partners are an excellent addition from an atmospheric perspective. Working your way through the world of the Thousand-Year Door feels a lot less lonely when you've got friends along for the ride, and Goombella joining you from the start gives your whole journey a bit of unique character. And most of the other partners add to that mix of character and camaraderie, which gives the game so much life. But you don't really have partners at any point. You have partner, singular. At every mechanical point, dialogue, exploration, puzzle-solving, combat, you have only one partner out. Of course, this isn't a bad thing, at least in theory. The game is designed around the system that one partner of your choice can accompany you, and you can switch when you please. There's a cost of switching in battle, but everything else is led by the player. The thing is, this is rarely an informed choice. If you're solving a puzzle or crawling through a dungeon, then yeah, you'll probably be able to tell who you need for each given obstacle. But for combat, for story progression, for company in the world, you just don't know who or what you will need. That is, until Goombella tells you what you need to know. See, Goombella is simply too useful to justify swapping her out. Tattle is a crucial battle element, since you don't have any idea about an enemy's attack patterns, stats, or even their HP until you use it. It takes at least one turn per new enemy, and you'll be seeing a lot of new enemies. Over 100 of them, in fact. Each world region has a new group of enemies. You can see them in the overworld, but they're often accompanied onto the battle stage by others, enemies you've never seen before. Throughout the game, you'll be seeing new enemies, monsters, bosses. Throughout the game, you'll need to use Tattle on each and every one of them. This doesn't seem so bad though, right? I mean, what's one turn in battle? Or 2 turns, I guess, since if you've got somebody else out already, you'll have to spend a turn switching. And I suppose 3 turns if you want to attack or anything while Goombella is tattling, or if you need to use somebody else's ability afterwards. And add a turn for each new enemy in the encounter, or for bosses that require multiple tattles for each phase, or each body part or something. It adds up quickly. Switching between partners takes a turn in battle. Tattling takes up a move, along with another 15 seconds or so as Goombella shares their stats, abilities, attack patterns, and her own personal feelings on each enemy. If you want to review an enemy's stats later in the game, you don't need to take a turn or switch or anything, but you get Goombella's whole spiel again. It's Goombella all the way down. Outside of battle, it's the same thing. You're in a new area, you don't know what you need to do. Goombella knows. She knows where you are, who you need to talk to, what everyone is doing, and what they want. The information and personality that Goombella adds to these places is incredibly valuable, mechanically and atmospherically, but it's only Goombella that can do it. This hurts because almost every other character is as interesting, if not more so, than Goombella. Some of these characters have really cool stories. I mean, we talked about Admiral Bobry, a broken man longing for relief from the grief over his dead wife, where you can help him heal and reconnect with his past life. Vivian was an enemy boss until her sister's bullying, not the least of which is over her identity as a trans woman, gets to her too much and she betrays them to join Mario, now opposing her sisters in fights. These stories aren't the deepest things in the world, but they are well worth experiencing. But when I came to face the Shadow Sirens in the last stretch of the game, as they mocked Vivian the traitor, it was Goombella there. The new boss fight meant a new Tattle after all, and when I finally beat Rock Hawk in the wrestling arena, it wasn't with Volkoshi, the baby Yoshi I had hatched there and who helped me climb the ranks, it was Goombella. It gets worse once you level up Goombella and she learns the Rally Wink ability. See, in most battles, Mario is going to be your strongest attacker. He's got the most power, the largest variety of moves, and the most flexibility. Unfortunately, when you attack, you're only allowed to use Mario once, and you have to do something with your partner next. But Rally Wink just gives Mario another attack for the piddly cost of some FP. I know that for a lot of people who've loved this game since its release and who've been begging for another like it, the partners are one of those cornerstone features that they miss. But for me, I don't know, maybe it's because I have no nostalgic attachment to it, or maybe I saw it better implemented in Bug Fables. Don't worry, I won't bring it up again. But it was just underwhelming for me. Now, that's not to say it's irredeemable. In fact, I think fixing this would not only be pretty easy to do, but could make the game, in every respect, a lot better. First off, give everyone, including Mario, the ability to tattle in and out of battle. I don't mind the turn cost of tattle on its own, but it's the switching around partners that gets aggravating. And for that matter, don't make switching partners cost a turn. There's a badge later on that negates this, and I consider it basically mandatory. I don't even understand that cost thematically. Having all of the partners out at all times would be busy and overpowered, but where do they go during the battle? Never mind. Finally, instead of having whichever partner is already out join you in battle, maybe you can set a default battle battle partner that you can switch when you want, so that you can get right into battles with your preferred fighter. I also think that cutscenes and dialogue should either be designed with all of your partners in mind, which to be fair would be a lot of work, or perhaps more attainably, a specific partner that is automatically out at the start of each scene. So the Professor Frankly scenes would be with Goombella, the Shadow Sirens would be with Vivian, Madame Flurry would not matter, that sort of stuff. The dialogue could be more engaging, and each partner's story could be better fleshed out without dramatically extending the game. See, I don't think the concept of partners is bad. In fact, they are sometimes incredible. I want to see this idea developed and improved and enhanced so that future games like this, and to be clear, I want future games like this, can be much better suited to take advantage of this foundation to deliver better stories, combat, and games overall. Okay, that last section was pretty negative, but in case it's unclear, I really liked The Thousand Year Door. I'm not a huge JRPG fan, mostly due to the turn-based combat, so for a game like this to draw me in, it must be pretty special, and The Thousand Year Door is very special. I wish I'd played it as a kid, because I think I'd have resonated with it greatly. But even playing it now as a jaded adult, this game still spoke to me. It's got problems and it's been mostly bested by another game since, but I truly believe that this game should be the base of a revival of the Paper Mario series. Please, Nintendo, don't let this game be it. Give us atmosphere, give us characters and places. Get weird with it, because when you do, you create some truly memorable stuff. I give Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door a B+. It's unique, it's atmospheric, and if the kinks of the partner and tattle systems could be ironed out, then this game would be damn close to a masterpiece. Thank you so much for watching this review. I want to hear your thoughts on this game, so let me know down in the comments what you thought of The Thousand Year Door. Are you a fan from 20 years ago? Did this remake turn you into a fan, or are you just not that into it? I read and reply to basically every comment, so tell me what you think of the game. And get subscribed for more reviews on some of the awesome indie games that have come out in the last month. Animal, Haunty, and maybe even a more robust review on Hades 2 now that I've beaten it. If this sounds interesting to you, you'll want to be subscribed. If you're looking for more content now, you can check out the latest chapter of my Tears of the Kingdom review series, or watch my video on Paper Mario: The Origami King to see what I thought of that game. But that's all I've got for you today, so enjoy your day and take care.